Deterioration is the enemy of your association, and deterioration never takes a day off. Association Reserves exists to guide your association towards a successful future. The only way you're going to have success is if your reserve funding is offsetting your ongoing deterioration. But that's easy for me to say. In actual practice, there are a lot of nuances that can trip you up. So we set aside a section of our annual Q&A webinar to specifically address your questions about reserve funding. We want you to be well equipped with answers. And sometimes that comes from learning from the questions of others. I bet you'll find the next few minutes helpful as you lead your association forward.
All right, time to move on to reserve funding issues. First question there. What is a recommended percent funded for a reserve study?
Let me get you set up to answer that one, Derek. How's that?
Yeah, this is a great slide. Associations that are funded 30% and below experience a higher risk of needing a special assessment or deferred maintenance at their site. Client base that is funded between 30 and 70% is that mid-tier funding range. And any clients that are 70% funded and above are in a strong funding position. This is an area where we don't see clients needing special assessments very often. Ideally, you would position your association to be 70% funded and above, and that ideal funding position is 100%.
All right, is there a minimum acceptable safe fully funded status?
It's all your risk. The property values drop when you start to get below 60, 50% funded, and your risk of special assessment and the disruption and the owner political problems, that just increases the lower you get down towards the 0% point. So your property values go down, you have more political trouble, and the roof doesn't care. The roof is going to deteriorate whether you're setting funds aside or not. So the owners are going to pay, whether it's in $20 more a month in their monthly assessments or 10 years down the road with a $8,000 special assessment. So our recommendation is always going to be do it along the way. It's fairer, and it's going to result in sufficient funds when you need them to do the projects on time to maximize your property values.
I have some clients that are 0% funded, some that are 2, 4, maybe 8% funded. It's not a pretty place for them to be. The association's essentially distressed at that point in time.
Yeah.
And, they're just looking to kind of try to figure things out. It's not a position where they're operating in any kind of smooth, normal mannerism for an association.
Yeah. Sometimes I illustrate or compare when you're in the 0 to 30% funded range. If you were a person, you'd be in the hospital. In the 30 to 70% range, you're out of the hospital, but you're probably on a number of prescription medications just to keep going. But the healthy associations, the ones in green, are out and about. They have healthy diets. They're living rich lives. You can see it in that kind of comparison too. So our professional counsel is always going to be above 70% funded.
Robert, do you have the graph showing how many associations are below 30%, below 70%?
Sure. We have this chart. It's the national profile of associations. You can see it's a little weighted towards the poor funded end of things, but the majority of associations are in that yellow middle range. Interestingly, the number of poorly funded associations is almost identical to the number of well-funded associations. But it's the poorly funded ones that make all the news, as Derek said. They're the ones where they're pulling their hair out. They are in a financially physically and financially precarious state at this time.
All right. Can you explain the difference between baseline, threshold, and fully funded?
Sure. I think we may be able to do it. I've got a couple of charts here. In the same chart, baseline funding designs the association to stay above zero. And so there will be many instances as you look forward 20 or 30 years where you get down to the 0% point, 0% or $0. Full funding is a funding plan that designs the association to aim for being 100% funded. I have another chart. Go backwards. Sorry about that. There we go. Basically, baseline funding designs you to have barely enough cash to do these projects. And you can imagine that if this project in the fifth year gets a little more expensive or occurs 1 year earlier, the associations are not going to have ready. They're not going to have enough cash, and they're going to get pushed into a special assessment or deferred maintenance situation. Full funding is this green line where you have a little bit of margin. And as you can imagine, it's a lot smoother sailing for the board, the members, and the home values support that objective.
Yeah. Baseline's essentially just in time, meaning you have the money or the funds available just in time for the projects. But I'll let everyone, the entire audience, in on a secret. We're not that good. We anticipate that these projects will happen in these certain years. But as Robert mentioned, if a big project, one of these big peaks, happens a year or two earlier or comes in over budget, and then you're not going to make it. You're going to be distressed again, and you're going to have to get some funds in some kind of way, either through a loan or a special assessment.
Yeah.
So you want a little bit of a buffer.
Let's combine a couple of answers. They asked about, we talked a little bit about frequency. If this association hires us for a reserve study this year, and we say that you got a big problem, big expense in 5 years, and they go away and they say, thank you very much, good for you. And if they just close their eyes and drift forward, there's a really good chance something is going to, inflation-wise, building code-wise, material costs, supply chain, or even weather and deterioration. Maybe we are wrong by a year. They're going to have a special assessment if they wait until the fifth year, open their eyes and say, oh, I guess we need to redo our roof this year. That's a problem. That's a good illustration of the value of updating your reserve study and the value of having a little bit of margin.
Robert, over the last 18, 20 months or so, our tracking of cost estimates and project estimates have gone up 20 to 30%. Yeah. So if you're still working with a reserve study from 2019 and you had this baseline or just-in-time model, everything's going to be off. You're not going to make it. But if you had some margin, then we can make those adjustments to your funding plan. And as close to real time as we can, as you hire us for updates, we can adjust your component information and your cost estimates. And then we can adjust your funding plan and give you a little bit more margin to make it over these peaks.
All right. Can funds be transferred between operational and capital reserves?
Let's be careful on that one. Can they be transferred? Yes, of course. It's your money, and you can take it from the left pocket and put it into the right pocket. The normal process in a month is you collect your assessments, and then from that, you take the reserve funds and put them over into the reserve savings account. So that should be happening every month, taking the reserve portion of your operating income and putting it over into reserves. Now, the dangerous part of that is running low on your operating budget and seeing your reserve budget, your reserve fund with $500,000 in it and say, oh, hey, no problem. Let's take some of our reserve funds and pay the insurance bill. That's a problem because those funds were there in the reserve fund to prepare you for your roof, your paint, your asphalt, your boiler, your elevator, whatever. So if you take from reserves to operating, that's going the wrong direction, and you should. And Derek, I believe, help me here. There's at least 2 states where it is state law. If you take from reserves to put into operating, you need to repay.
Yeah, California is one of those two states. If you borrow from reserves to pay down an obligation through operating, then you must repay it within 12 months. There's also a number of disclosures that have to go out, letting all the membership know exactly how much you borrowed and what the payback is and how you plan to pay it back.
Okay, great. We have a major project for erosion for our association coming up that's currently not in the reserve study. Can we pay the $50,000 up front and then add it to the reserve study for ongoing maintenance after that?
I would suggest that you update your reserve study. Again, Robert mentioned it's just hundreds of dollars to do a no-site visit financial update. This covers all your bases, and we can add that erosion project into the study. And that way you can disclose to the membership what's going on. No funny business going on there.
Yeah. That's the best way. If you're literally mid-year and it's the wrong time to be updating your reserve study, remember the higher authority is always National Reserve Study standards. So if it passes a National Reserve Study standard 4-part test, it is a reserve expense. But very quickly, if you spend that money, just like I said a moment ago, it had been effectively earmarked for the roof or something else. And so you've got to rebalance your reserve funding, and that's best done with an updated reserve study. So get your reserve study updated, but bottom line is if it's a reserve expense according to National Reserve Study standards, it's a reserve expense. Just don't wait very long at all to update your reserve study and rebalance things.
Okay. How is your suggested annual reserve contribution determined? Is it by a formula?
I think I've got a slide here. It starts with fundamentally the needs of the association. Let's take an easy one here. The second line, pool resurface. It's $10,000 done every 10 years. And so you can see that it's deteriorating at the rate of $1,000 a year. So you do this for all your components, and you realize that you need to be in the range of about 20 grand per year at this association. Now, then you get into cash management issues. You get into margin issues that we spoke about a moment ago, being baseline funded, which is just barely having the cash just in time, as in Derek's words. Or if you want a little more margin, that will help your cash flow and property values. So there's a number of factors that go into it, but it's fundamentally driven by your reserve component list and the deterioration of those components.
Yeah, when I'm doing an analysis, Robert, I'm always looking to make sure that the association has sufficient cash. I want them to have stable contribution rates each and every year moving forward. I want it to be evenly distributed amongst current owners and then future owners. And then I want it to also be fiscally responsible. These are the four standards that I look to when developing a funding plan. But just know that there's other pathways for an association to take to set up successfully a funding plan for that particular association.
I hope that this was valuable to you. If you still have questions, no worries. We're always here to help. If you're an existing client, contact your project manager. If you want to avoid special assessments and deferred maintenance, visit reservestudy.com and get a free proposal for your association now, in time for your next board meeting.